Now, as I work, you'll notice that I constantly turn this thing around all the time, and that's because in this rough stage, it's very important to get every angle looking as good as possible. And I'm taking things into account like the silhouette. I'm trying to establish that the strongest silhouette I can in the skull shape, the skull in particular. The cranium from the back, there's a line um, which which corresponds to the look of an actual skull, although this one is very distorted and stretched out. When it comes to skull shapes, it's important to remember that they're not just simple eggs. They have definite planes and definite wedge shapes buried in them. They can be very characteristic with all their knobs and vaulted planes and little kicks and turns. And it brings a great deal of interest to a character if you can introduce all those little, not imperfections, but subtleties. The more of that you can introduce, the more character your creature will have. I couldn't resist putting some eyeballs in there just to help me get a clue as to whether or not I'm on the right track. Because the drawing had these sort of like angry little beady pop eyes, and at this stage, I just need to see if I'm on the right track, and that helps me to figure that out. That's the gums there, and roughing out just some little teeth. Same as the eyes. This is just to help me get a feeling of whether or not I'm on the right track. With the form very roughly established, although by no means complete, I'm starting to play around with how can I pose the neck to give this sculpture, this finished, when this piece is finished, how can I pose it to give it the maximum effect? And this is, for me, like one of the most fun parts of sculpting is putting the pose in there. Um, it's almost like a little bit like what I assume it would be like if one was to do stop motion animation, because you find that just moving it the tiniest little increment one way or another gives the character a completely different intent. And this part is just really fun because here's where I get to decide what that intent is going to be. It's the closest part to acting that I get to when I sculpt. In a perfect world, I wouldn't only just be sculpting and drawing creatures. I'd want to see them moving around and performing, whether as puppets or digital creatures or whatever. And as just mainly a sculptor and artist, this is the closest I come to doing that. And I think that pose and the attitude you can get into your work is a good way to set that work apart. It's when it comes to form, I mean, there's a million and one things you can do with any particular creature, but in the end, there's just so much out there. It's helpful to find things besides form to make your work unique. And for me, uh, posing my sculptures is as much part of it as the design and the form and finish. In fact, I'd say the finish is probably the least important thing. This right here is the stage of sculpting which I just consider to be pure fun. It's still loose enough for me to change things around quite a bit if I want to, but I'm already beginning to get a sense of whether or not I'm going to end up doing a sculpture I'm happy with. It's still very far from being there, but I'm starting to get a sense that yeah, this might work, and today might be a good day after all. One thing that is kind of concerning me at the moment is that even with the exaggerated proportions, it's seeming like a very conventional special effects kind of witch design. And even though it is supposed to be a witch-like character, I want to be careful that I'm going to try my best not to have it look like a lot of stuff that's been done. And of course, this is really the heart of it, trying to do something new. When you're basing it on forms that are basically finite. You can see I put those long dangling earlobes in, like I had drawn in the drawing, thinking that that was a good idea. But as I move on, I may decide that that's not a good idea, and I may change it. Um, from a practical standpoint, those earlobes really get in the way when I'm sculpting. Not that that should be a reason to get rid of them, but I think later on I decide that those earlobes are just a little too busy. Uh, and that's another important thing to remember is that one thing I've learned as I've done this over many years is that the simpler something is, the better, usually. To say more with less is a stronger statement than to say much with more. Right here, I am establishing another very important character line in my piece, which is that sneering, curved line of the upper lip. I want to get that line just right. Um, And that's where I think my style of sculpture really starts to relate a lot to graphic art. I really respond a lot to strong line work. So people that I admire are artists like Egon Schiele and Arthur Rackham and a lot of caricaturists as well. And you can see I'm trying to put in all the little kicks and turns and little corners and angles that I've become familiar with over years of studying human anatomy and the human skull. That's something that just comes with doing it a lot. It seems like a with any kind of sculpting, it just seems like, or rather, any kind of representational or realistic sculpture. It seems like it's always a balance between putting enough subtlety and nuances in, but not letting that get too busy. For me, that sort of characterized my progress as a sculptor. Learning to look at everything holistically and as a solid cohesive whole, which stands up when looking at it from a distance, but still getting enough interest and changes of plane and shifts in form and livening up the silhouette as possible. And that is really because if you go too far that way, your thing just could easily start losing its integrity and just break down into something that's a bit of an eyesore. And yet, if you make something too solid and simplistic, that's not very interesting. It's been my goal to try to get a fine balance between those two aspects. Now I'm hollowing out the area between the neck and the clavicles. By the way, you'll notice that the this whole time up until now, I've used only my hands and no tools at all. Um, when you're roughing things out, that's where you want to get as much energy and movement and life into your sculpt as you can. And there's something about using only your fingertips. It's a direct line from your brain to the sculpture. I find that the more distance you put between the sculpture and your hand, the more is easily lost in these beginning stages. I try to avoid taking clay away at first, where what I prefer to do is push that clay around. So it's a process of adding clay and pushing it around rather than scraping it off because it can easily start to become somewhat erosive. It's something about adding clay on rather than taking it off at first is somewhat more organic. But I will be cutting and scraping clay off sooner or later, but just not at this stage. You'll notice that I haven't evened out the eyes. They're two different sizes right now because after making the one on the right side of the sculpture larger, uh, in my head I was thinking, well, maybe this would be interesting to have asymmetrical eyes. So one slightly smaller, maybe that'd be more creepy and something that you would instinctually trust less if you saw something with one eye slightly bigger than the other. Uh, and again, that's like the earlobes. I may decide later on that I don't like that. And these are not. This isn't me finalizing the eyes by any means. It's putting the pupils in is like just another sort of placeholder thing I'm doing to give me a sense of whether or not this is going to be anything like the drawing that I used as my starting point. Although I may not actually sculpt verbatim what I've drawn, there was something about the drawing that I do kind of respond to and I did kind of like. There was this initial spark in it that's what I'm trying to capture in my sculpture, if not the strictly realizing what I'd drawn. And you'll notice again that I really do turn the sculpture around a lot when I sculpt, so no side gets any more attention than the other. Sculpture is 3D, and it's important to take full advantage of that. Sorry, I don't mean to flip you off, but my middle finger is just a very useful sculpting finger. Now you can see what I mean about the earlobes getting in the way. I've had to lift them up to get under there. In the end, I think it was a combination. I do get rid of them later on, and it was a combination of just the impracticality of them getting in the way, and also just visually cluttering up the sculpt.